Welcome to the History Maps podcast.
Yeah, welcome in.
Usually, when we discuss a continental superpower expanding its borders, there's this expectation of terrestrial momentum. You track the massive armies of cavalry sweeping across the plains.
Right, conquering city after city.
Exactly. And the map inevitably just turns a single color. It operates on a kind of land-based inertia where sheer numbers and established siege tactics dictate the outcome.
Yeah, and that land-based inertia is the foundational logic of almost every major terrestrial empire. The strategic assumption is that, well, if you possess a logistical network capable of feeding a massive army, and if your troops are disciplined, the actual environment is just a temporary obstacle.
Like you just build a bridge or level a forest.
Precisely. You build a bridge, you starve a walled city. The earth itself is something to be conquered and subdued beneath the hooves of the cavalry.
But step into the world of Southeast Asian geopolitics in the late 13th century, and suddenly that unstoppable avalanche hits the ocean.
It really does.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the Mongol invasions of Java, which serves as a crucial chapter in our Southeast Asian history series.
And our mission for this deep dive is to analyze the extensive documentation surrounding this specific clash, the conflict between the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan and the kingdoms of Java.
We want to guide you, the listener, through the geopolitical buildup, the brutal realities of tropical warfare, the tactical betrayals, and how this failed invasion inadvertently catalyzed the birth of the Machabahet Empire.
Right, which became the most dominant maritime power in Southeast Asian history. We are essentially dissecting a moment where a land-based superpower attempted to project naval dominance across the equator.
Which is a massive undertaking.
It is. The Yuan dynasty was testing the absolute limits of their imperial machine, pushing their logistical capabilities to the breaking point in an environment that actively resisted conventional warfare.
Yeah, and to grasp the magnitude of this collision, you really have to look closely at the board where this geopolitical chess match is taking place. We're looking at the Indonesian archipelago. Right. This is not the open steppe of Central Asia, where a horse archer can just ride for weeks without breaking his line of sight. This is a fragmented, massive string of islands.
And the entire rhythm of life, economics, and warfare there is dictated by something entirely outside of human control. The monsoon wind patterns.
Monsoons, yeah, let's get into that, because they're the fundamental engine of this entire region's history, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They aren't just weather. They were the infrastructure of trade. To understand how navigation worked in the 13th century, you really have to look at the atmospheric pressure systems.
Right, because you couldn't just turn on a motor.
Exactly. During the northern summer, the winds blow out of the high-pressure zones of the central Australian desert. They pick up moisture over the Timor Sea, but it's essentially a persistent, directional wind blowing from the south and east.
Okay, I'm following.
Then, the cycle inverts. In the northern winter, the pattern reverses entirely. You get a wind blowing from the north and west, crossing the vast stretches of the South China and Java Seas.
So if you're a merchant or an admiral in the 13th century, you're entirely beholden to this atmospheric clock. You can't just decide to set sail whenever the emperor commands it.
No, you definitely cannot.
You sail south to the archipelago on the winter monsoon, and you're trapped there. You literally have to wait in these foreign ports for months until the summer monsoon allows you to sail back north to China or west to India.
And that waiting period, that's the key to Southeast Asian wealth.
How so?
Well, because merchants from China, India, and the Middle East all had to stop and wait for the winds to change. The shallow waters of the Sunda Shelf, that's the submerged landmass that connects the western Indonesian islands like Sumatra and Java to the Asian mainland, it became the ultimate crossroads for global trade.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, port cities emerged not just as trading posts, but as cosmopolitan waiting rooms for the entire global economy.
And whoever controls those ports, specifically along the Java Sea and the Straits of Malacca, they basically act as the toll booth for the world's most lucrative goods.
Precisely. We're talking about the flow of spices that could not be grown anywhere else on Earth at the time. Cloves, nutmeg, and mace from the Maluku Islands in the east.
Plus the flow of pepper, massive quantities of rice, sandalwood. I mean, the economic stakes are astronomical here.
They really are. And by the mid-13th century, the power capitalizing most aggressively on this maritime wealth was the Singasari Kingdom, located in eastern Java.
Right, the rise of Singasari is a story of deliberate, calculated expansion. They were basically filling a power vacuum left by the decline of the old Srivijaya Empire.
Which had historically controlled the vital Straits of Malacca. Singasari recognized that true power didn't lie just in controlling the agricultural heartland of Java, but in projecting power outward to secure those maritime toll booths.
Which brings us to a specific historical figure who really sets this entire conflict in motion, King Kurtanagar.
Yes, King Kurtanagar.
He ascended to the Singasari throne in 1268. And he's not interested in being a local king. He has a massive regional vision. In 1275, he launches something called the Pemalayu expedition.
And the Pamalayu expedition was not a simple raiding party. It was a comprehensive naval campaign designed to fundamentally restructure the geopolitical map of Southeast Asia.
So what was his actual goal with that?
Well, Kurtanagar sent his fleets to subdue the Sumatran states. His goal was to sever any remaining independent control over the Malacca Straits and draw the lucrative trade routes directly under his own administration.
He's building a monopoly, basically.
Exactly. Kurtanagar was building a protective ring of vassal states, securing his flanks, and forming alliances with states as far away as Champa, which is located in modern-day Vietnam. He was creating a maritime bloc to counterbalance the northern powers.
I kind of think of Singasari and the Yuan Empire as two large weather systems forming independently. You have Kurtanagar in the south, actively consolidating a maritime trade empire, pulling all this immense wealth and naval power into Java.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And simultaneously, in the north, Kublai Khan has established the Yuan dynasty and conquered China. He's constructing a continental superpower that is aggressively pushing outward. Because of the dictates of geography and economics, these two expanding spheres of influence are just on a collision course.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Mongols were undergoing a massive strategic metamorphosis. Kublai Khan had already secured the vast Eurasian landmass.
Right.
His focus was actively shifting from overland conquest to maritime domination. He needed to assert a Sinocentric world order where the Yuan dynasty sat at the absolute center of global trade and diplomacy.
But his early attempts at projecting naval power didn't go so well.
They were fraught with disaster. By the 1280s, the Yuan dynasty had faced severe, humiliating setbacks in their attempts to invade Japan and Vietnam.
Yeah.
The naval campaigns were exposing the limitations of a military doctrine built entirely around steppe cavalry.
But Kublai Khan needs to secure these maritime trade routes to fuel his empire, and he needs to prove that his authority extends beyond the shoreline. So he starts sending imperial envoys all across Southeast Asia.
Right, and the mandate is straightforward. These independent kingdoms must submit, declare themselves vassals to the Great Khan, and pay tribute to the Yuan court.
Let's pause to examine what tribute actually meant in this context, because from the Chinese perspective, the tributary system wasn't merely a protection racket or like a simple exchange of goods.
No, not at all. It was a manifestation of cosmic order. The emperor was the son of heaven, holding the mandate to rule all under heaven. Submitting tribute was an acknowledgement of this universal hierarchy.
So a foreign ruler sending tribute was accepting their rightful subordinate place in the natural order of the universe.
Exactly, which sets the stage for a severe diplomatic collision. In 1289, Kublai Khan dispatches an envoy named Meng Qi to the Singasari court.
Meng Qi arrives in Java and delivers the standard imperial demand. King Kurtanagar must formally submit. He must personally travel to the Yuan court, and he must offer tribute.
And you have to understand, to the Yuan court, an imperial envoy was an inviolable extension of the emperor's physical person.
Right, they were essentially the emperor in the room.
Exactly. Refusing the envoy was an act of treason. Harming the envoy was considered an impossibility, a violation of the most basic rules of diplomatic engagement.
Well, Kurtanagar doesn't just refuse the envoy. He subjects Meng Qi to deliberate, ritualistic physical mutilation.
Yeah, it's intense.
Depending on the chronicles you read, Kurtanagar orders his guards to brand Meng Qi's face with a hot iron, which was identical to the punishment reserved for common thieves, or he physically severs the envoy's ear. He then forces the bleeding, permanently disfigured diplomat back onto his ship and sends him home to China.
The violence of the act really requires deep analysis. Kurtanagar wasn't acting out of a sudden fit of rage. This was a highly calculated ideological rejection of the Mongol tributary framework.
How so? Like, what was his justification?
Well, Kurtanagar's political ideology was rooted in a unique fusion of Shaivite Hinduism and Tantric Buddhism. He practiced a specific form of esoteric Buddhism where he viewed himself as a Bhairava, a terrifying divine incarnation of spiritual and temporal power.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, within his own cosmological framework, Kurtanagar was a universal monarch. A Chakravartin.
Okay, let's unpack this. Krittinagara believes he is a living god king, but he's also a pragmatic ruler who has built a massive navy and conquered neighboring islands.
Right.
He surely knows the Mongols have conquered half the known world, leveling entire cities that defied them. Given the Mongols' reputation for absolute destruction, why would a Javanese king deliberately invite their wrath with such a grotesque, undeniable insult?
It's a fair question.
Like, why not just offer a few symbolic chests of gold, play along with the tributary theater, and keep the Mongols at bay?
It fundamentally comes down to a miscalculation regarding geography and logistics. Krittinagara believed that Java's geographical isolation provided an impenetrable shield.
Ah, he thought they were just too far away.
Exactly. He assumed that the physical distance between China and Java was simply too vast for an actual, full-scale Mongol amphibious assault to succeed. Furthermore, he was well aware of the Yunnan dynasty's recent naval catastrophes against Japan.
Right, the storms that destroyed their fleets.
Yeah. He looked at those failures and concluded that the Mongols were incapable of projecting massive military force across open oceans.
Yeah.
He thought he could publicly humiliate the Great Khan to assert his own regional dominance without ever having to face the military consequences.
I want you, the listener, to put yourself in the shoes of the Yang court for a moment. Meng Qi survives the grueling, months-long voyage back across the South China Sea. He walks into the opulence of Kublai Khan's court. He's a living, breathing, permanently scarred symbol of Singasari's defiance.
Yeah, the visual of that is striking.
Every general, every noble in that room sees the branded face or the missing ear. The insult is physical and undeniable. Kublai Khan cannot simply ignore this.
You really can't.
If he allows a maritime upstart in Java to mutilate his envoy without consequence, the entire illusion of his universal authority shatters. The southern trade routes he desperately wants to control will fall out of his grasp. The insult absolutely demands a massive punitive expedition.
Krittinagara's assumption that Java was too far away to suffer consequences was about to be challenged by the sheer scale of Mongol industrial and military mobilization. Kublai Khan's response wasn't immediate, but it was overwhelming.
In 1292, Kublai Khan orders the assembly of an armada at the southern Chinese port of Quanzhou. We're talking about a mobilization of 20,000 to 30,000 troops.
It's a massive force.
They are boarding a fleet estimated at anywhere from 500 to 1,000 vessels. The scale of this undertaking requires a logistical infrastructure that's difficult to even comprehend for the late 13th century.
And we need to deconstruct the composition of this Yuan military force. It is vital to discard the traditional image of a homogeneous Mongol horde of horse archers.
Right, it wasn't just guys on horses.
No. The Yuan military operating out of Quanzhou was a deeply complex, integrated imperial machine. The vast majority of the infantry consisted of conscripted Han Chinese from the recently conquered southern Song provinces.
All right.
These were soldiers who were already accustomed to fighting in riverine, humid, and forested environments.
And the command structure reflects this imperial integration perfectly, too. The overall supreme commander is Shibi, who is a veteran Mongol general. But the ground troops are led by a Chinese officer named Gao Sheng.
Right.
And the maritime navigation, the actual complex science of moving 1,000 ships across the ocean, is commanded by a man named Ike Mies, who is an Uyghur.
Now, the presence of an Uyghur navigator often confuses people, as the Uyghurs are traditionally associated with the landlocked Tarim Basin.
Yeah, you don't typically associate them with the ocean.
Right. However, by the 13th century, Uyghur administrators and merchants were deeply integrated into the vast Muslim maritime trade networks that connected the Middle East, India, and China.
That makes sense.
Quanzhou itself was an incredibly cosmopolitan port city with a massive foreign merchant population. Ike Mies possessed the specific maritime intelligence and network connections required to guide a fleet of this magnitude through the perilous waters of Southeast Asia.
Think about the logistical nightmare of feeding 30,000 men at sea. They can't just stop at a local port and buy groceries. The historical records indicate the fleet was armed with a full 1-year supply of grain.
A whole year?
Yeah. They also carried 40,000 ounces of silver. This was hard currency intended to purchase local provisions or bribe local officials once they arrived in the archipelago. They were preparing for a sustained, isolated campaign far beyond the reach of any supply lines.
And the journey south was an exercise in pure attrition. They departed the Chinese coast in the winter of 1292, catching the northern monsoon winds.
Right, using that atmospheric clock.
Exactly. But the ocean crossing was brutal. The fleet encountered violent typhoons that scattered their formations. They attempted to make landfall at Champa to resupply and repair their vessels, but the local authorities, likely allied with Java or simply terrified of the massive army, explicitly refused them entry.
So they're forced to keep sailing. You have thousands of men packed into the holds of these ships. The sanitation must have been non-existent. They're suffering heavy tolls from dysentery, seasickness, and starvation.
The fighting strength of the troops is bleeding away into the ocean long before they ever see the coast of Java.
The physical reality of this grueling 4,000-kilometer path is not just textual either. We actually have archaeological evidence.
We do. In the Karamata Strait, which is a treacherous passage located between Sumatra and Borneo, archaeologists discovered the Srutu Island inscriptions.
What are those exactly?
They are physical stone carvings left behind by the Yuan fleet. The inscriptions explicitly name the commanders Shi Bi and Ike Mes. It's a tangible marker of their passage, proving they navigated these specific islands as they fought their way toward the equator.
But while this massive armada is slowly fighting its way across the sea, enduring storms and disease, the political reality at their destination fundamentally changes.
It really does. Remember King Kertanegre, the man who branded the envoy and provoked this entire invasion?
Yeah, the Bayava.
Right, well, he never sees the Mongol fleet. In 1292, before the Yuan forces even arrive in the archipelago, Kertanegre is assassinated in a violent palace coup.
The king who started the war is dead before the enemy even arrives. The coup is orchestrated by a man named Jayakatwang. He was the Adipati, or regional duke, of the neighboring vassal kingdom of Kadiri.
To understand the coup, you really have to look at the historical tension between these regions. Kadiri was a formerly dominant kingdom that had been subjugated by Singhasari.
So they were looking for payback.
Yes. Jayakatwang saw an opportunity to reclaim his ancestral power. Kertanegre had committed a massive strategic error by sending the bulk of his elite military forces away on the Pamalayu expedition and other expansionist campaigns.
He left his back door open.
He left his capital completely exposed. Jayakatwang's forces launched a coordinated, multi-pronged surprise assault on the Singhasari capital and executed Kertanegre.
And this assassination plunges eastern Java into immediate chaotic civil war. The centralized maritime empire Kertanegre built collapses overnight. Now, Kertanegre had a son-in-law named Radenwijaya.
Right.
When the capital falls, Radenwijaya initially attempts to rally the loyalist forces and mount a defense against the Kadiri armies. But he's completely overwhelmed by Jayakatwang's numbers. Radenwijaya is forced to flee for his life.
He retreats eastward, crossing the narrow strait to the island of Madura. He's seeking the protection of the local regent there, a man named Arya Wiraja.
Who is quite the character.
Arya Wiraja is one of the most fascinating political operators in this narrative. He's deeply pragmatic. He provides shelter to the exiled prince, but he also assesses the military reality.
He knows they can't win a straight fight.
Exactly. He knows they don't possess the manpower to defeat Jayakatwang in open combat. So Arya Wiraja advises Radenwijaya to execute a highly calculated temporary surrender.
Following this advice, Radenwijaya travels back to the usurper, Jayakatwang, and formally submits to his authority. He basically humbles himself before the man who killed his father-in-law.
And Jayakatwang makes a fatal political miscalculation here. Perhaps feeling secure in his newly claimed power, or perhaps wanting to present himself as a magnanimous ruler, he accepts the submission and pardons Radenwijaya.
Which is a huge mistake.
Yes, he even grants the exiled prince a tract of undeveloped forested land called the Tarik Timberland, giving him permission to clear the forest and establish a new settlement.
And when Radenwijaya and his loyal followers begin clearing the dense jungle of the Tarik timberland, they find these wild trees producing an incredibly bitter-tasting fruit called the maja.
The maja fruit, right.
Taking inspiration from the harshness of their exile and the bitter fruit of the land, they name their new settlement Majapahit, which literally translates to bitter maja.
What's fascinating here is the absolute disconnect between the political reality in Java and the military objective of the Yuan fleet currently sailing toward them.
Right. The fleet has no idea what's going on.
None. The Mongol expedition is enduring horrific conditions, burning through resources, all to punish King Kertanegre. But the king is dead. They are sailing to conquer the Singhasari kingdom. But the kingdom has been absorbed by Kadiri.
Yeah.
The Mongol fleet is essentially sailing into a geopolitical void, completely unaware that the primary target of their invasion no longer exists.
It fundamentally alters the defensive posture of the island. Instead of facing Kartanagar's massive unified fleet waiting to intercept them in the Java Sea or, a centralized army defending the beaches, the UN forces are sailing into a fractured landscape.
The rival Javanese warlords are entirely focused on internal consolidation and destroying each other. The island is completely distracted by its own civil war.
Which brings us to the crucial moment of contact. In March 1293, the battered, exhausted Yuan armada finally reaches the northern coast of Java. They make landfall at the port of Tuban.
And Raden Wijaya is sitting in his new, fledgling settlement of Majapahit. He receives word that tens of thousands of foreign troops have just landed on the coast. He sees an immediate, unprecedented opportunity.
So what does he do?
He sends his envoys straight to the Yuan commanders at Tuban. Wijaya's diplomatic approach is masterful. He offers the Yuan commanders exactly what Kublai Khan demanded from the beginning. He offers total submission to the Yuan emperor. He offers to pay the required tribute.
He's basically saying, I'm your guy.
Yes. He even provides the Yuan generals with detailed maps of the Javanese interior, mapping out the river systems, the roads, and the fortifications of the Kadiri kingdom. In exchange for all of this, he asks for one specific favor. He requests Mongol military assistance to march inland and defeat the usurper Jayakatwang.
From the perspective of the Yuan generals Shibi, Gashing, and Aikmeza, this offer must have seemed like a miraculous stroke of luck. They've just survived a nightmare ocean crossing. Their men are sick, they're standing on the edge of a hostile, sweltering jungle environment they do not understand.
And suddenly a local prince appears, offering to serve as their guide.
Exactly. Providing vital intelligence and promising the exact political submission that fulfills their imperial mandate. They readily agree to the alliance.
But before we analyze the ensuing campaign, we really must examine the specific military technologies these two forces are bringing to the battlefield. The clash between the Yuan Imperial Army and the Javanese defenders is a collision of vastly different martial traditions and environmental adaptations.
Let's look at the Yuan forces first. They're bringing the absolute bleeding edge of 13th century continental military technology. The infantry are equipped with light steel helmets and tough, layered hide armor designed to stop arrows.
Right?
They possess the incredibly powerful composite reflex bow, which can pierce armor at significant range. They've brought steppe cavalry. But the most disruptive element they introduced to this tropical battlefield is gunpowder.
Yes, the gunpowder.
UN forces were equipped with explosive catapult grenades called taipao.
Taipao, what exactly were those?
These were essentially early fragmentation bombs. They consisted of a cast iron shell filled with gunpowder, designed to be hurled by siege engines or even thrown by specialized infantry.
Okay, so like a rudimentary grenade.
Very much so. When the fuse reached the powder, the iron shell would shatter, sending lethal shrapnel tearing through enemy formations. The noise, the smoke, and the kinetic impact were designed to completely shatter the psychological discipline of an enemy force unaccustomed to explosive weaponry. The Javanese forces, conversely, are adapted entirely to their environment. A large portion of their army relies on temporarily conscripted peasant levies who wore minimal armor, prioritizing mobility in the suffocating heat. However, their professional infantry elite were highly formidable.
They certainly were.
They wore a specific type of brass scale armor called siping.
The siping armor is a brilliant piece of metallurgical adaptation. Brass does not rust in the intense humidity like iron does.
Of course. Iron would just turn to rust in that jungle.
Exactly. The overlapping scales provided excellent protection against slashing attacks while remaining flexible and breathable enough to allow a soldier to fight in the equatorial heat without succumbing to heat stroke.
That's incredibly smart.
They fought with spears, and specifically with the keris, an asymmetrical, wavy dagger. The keri is not a longsword. It's designed for devastating close-quarters combat in dense foliage, where swinging a long blade is impossible.
And the naval technology of the Javanese is equally impressive. They utilized massive transport and war vessels known as jong ships. Historical accounts from various travelers describe these jongs as being massive, sometimes up to 80 meters long, capable of carrying hundreds of men and massive amounts of cargo.
The maritime engineering of the jong is fascinating. They did not rely on iron nails, which, again, would quickly corrode in the salt water.
Right.
Instead, the massive wooden planks were joined together using wooden dowels. Furthermore, the hulls were constructed using multiple layers of extremely thick wooden planks, sometimes up to 4 layers deep.
This construction made them incredibly resilient. The relatively primitive gunpowder artillery of the Yuan fleet, the early cannons or explosive charges were practically useless against the hulls of the Zhang ships.
Yeah, the projectile would simply embed itself in the outer layers of the thick wood without breaching the inner hull. The ships were floating fortresses.
Floating fortresses, and we must discuss the apex predator of the Javanese battlefield, the war elephant.
The war elephant.
The Javanese utilized these massive animals essentially as living siege engines capable of breaking through dense jungle terrain and smashing infantry lines. Here's where it gets really interesting. We always hear about the invincibility of the Mongol cavalry.
Right, the classic narrative.
The narrative is that they sweep across the battlefield and nothing can stop them. But I want to picture the reality for one of those northern steppe horses. This animal has been trapped in the dark hold of a rocking ship for months. It's finally offloaded onto a beach. The temperature is sweltering, the humidity is oppressive.
It's totally alien to them.
The horse is surrounded by dense, unfamiliar foliage. And then the earth starts vibrating, and a line of massive armored elephants charges out of the jungle, trumpeting loudly. How does a cavalry unit reliant on speed and formation maintain any kind of discipline against that?
The short answer is they don't.
They just break.
It is exceptionally difficult to maintain cavalry discipline under those conditions. Horses are inherently prey animals. The unfamiliar, pungent scent of an elephant, combined with the massive visual threat and the deafening noise, triggers an instinctual, uncontrollable panic in a horse.
Which ruins the whole Mongol strategy.
The Yuan commanders recognized this vulnerability immediately. They understood that their traditional doctrine of sweeping cavalry flanks was useless in the jungles of Java. They had to adapt their strategy.
And their adaptation relies heavily on utilizing the rivers. The dense jungles are impassable for an army moving heavy equipment and siege engines. The rivers are the only viable highways into the interior of the island.
Precisely. The Yuan-Majapahit alliance moves aggressively against Jagat Wang's Kadiri forces. To maximize their advance and protect their logistics, the Yuan commanders split their forces into two coordinated columns.
How did they divide them?
Shibi takes command of the naval route. He leads a massive flotilla of shallow draft transport ships and fighting vessels down the Sadeyu estuary, pushing aggressively into the Kali Mas River. The Kali Mas is a major tributary of the vital Brantis River system, which leads directly toward the Kadiri heartland.
While the fleet pushes up the river, Gao Xing and the navigator Aikmez lead the ground troops. They march parallel to the riverbank, hacking their way through the terrain. Their primary objective is to protect the fleet's flanks from ambushes and secure the riverbanks as the ships advance.
This dual advance strategy leads to the first major engagement of the campaign on March 22nd. This is known as the Battle of Kali Mas. The Kadiri defenders are fully aware of the Yuan advance.
Right, they see them coming.
They attempt to choke off the river by deploying a massive fleet of barges and riverine warships to block the Yuan flotilla.
But the Yuan commanders demonstrate incredible tactical discipline during this engagement. When they encounter the river blockade, they do not panic. The ground troops construct a fortified, crescent-shaped defensive encampment on the riverbank.
It's a very solid move.
Yeah, this formation secures their landing zones and provides a stable base of fire. When the Kadiri forces attempt to engage, the Yuan unleash a coordinated combined arms assault.
You have Yuan archers firing disciplined volleys from the crescent encampment on the banks. You have the heavily armored infantry holding the line against any amphibious counterattacks. And simultaneously, the Yuan fleet presses forward, utilizing their explosive Tai-Pow grenades to blast apart the dense formations of the Javanese barges.
The Kadiri River blockade is fundamentally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of disciplined fire and the shock of the explosive weaponry. The historical texts specifically note a visual detail that brings this battle to life.
Oh, the devil heads.
Yes. The Yuan forces capture over 100 large Javanese boats, and the texts mention that these boats were adorned with terrifying devil heads carved at the bow.
The capture of those vessels at Kali Mas was the turning point of the initial invasion. It shattered the primary Javanese riverine defense and cleared the logistical artery. With the river secured, the Yuan forces were able to push their heavy equipment and supplies deep into the interior, marching roughly 100 kilometers inland through the Brantis River Valley.
They're guided every step of the way by Raden Wajaya's scouts, who know the terrain perfectly. Finally, in late April, the massive Yuan army arrives at the fortified capital city of Daha, the heart of Jayakat Wang's Kadiri kingdom.
On April 26th, the siege of Daha begins. And this is not a prolonged blockade, it is a massive, aggressive, set-piece battle. The fighting commences at 6 o'clock in the morning and rages continuously until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
The Yuan-Mujahid alliance attacks the city from 3 separate directions simultaneously. This coordinated assault stretches the Qadiri defenders to their absolute breaking point.
And the Yuan utilize their superior infantry discipline, pressing the walls and deploying their gunpowder grenades to blast apart the defensive formations.
When forced into a conventional set-piece battle defending a fixed location, the decentralized Javanese levies simply couldn't withstand the concentrated professional military pressure of the Yuan Imperial Army. The casualties for the Qadiri forces are catastrophic.
Right.
The records indicate over 5,000 Qadiri soldiers are killed in the direct, brutal melee combat around the city walls.
As the defensive lines collapse, sheer panic sets in among the defenders. Thousands more attempt to flee the carnage by retreating across the swollen river behind the city, but they are weighed down by their weapons and armor.
So they get swept away.
They are swept away by the current, and thousands drown in the chaotic retreat. The capital city of Daha falls. Jia Katuang, the usurper who had orchestrated the coup and killed Kertanagara, realizes his entire army has evaporated. He surrenders to the Mongol commanders and is taken prisoner.
The tactical adaptation of the Yuan army deserves recognition here. Operating in a totally unfamiliar, hostile environment against an enemy utilizing war elephants and heavy river galleys, their disciplined coordination of amphibious support and land-based assaults proved highly effective.
They achieved absolute military supremacy over the target they were directed to attack.
I mean, put yourself in the position of the Yuan generals Shibi and Gaoshing in this exact moment. It's late April. They are standing victorious in the conquered capital of Daha. The local king who dared to rebel against their authority is sitting in chains in their camp.
Right.
They've secured a solemn promise of massive tribute from their local ally, Raden Wijaya. From their point of view, the punitive expedition is an unmitigated glorious success. They've fulfilled the emperor's mandate. They're likely already calculating the honors and wealth they'll receive upon returning to Quanzhou.
But that perspective is dangerously narrow. It entirely ignores the fundamental political reality of their alliance. Raden Wijaya has also achieved his primary objective.
He got what he wanted.
He brilliantly utilized the blunt instrument of the Yuan military machine to completely eliminate his rival, Jia Katuang. The usurpation of his father-in-law is avenged. The Qadiri army is destroyed.
Raden Wijaya looks around and realizes that the only obstacle remaining between him and total dominion over the island of Java is the foreign army currently occupying the capital. He does not want to be a vassal to Kublai Khan. He needs to remove the Yuan presence entirely.
And he executes this removal with cold, calculated, and ruthless precision. The political maneuvering here is a masterclass in deception.
How does he pull it off?
Raden Wijaya approaches the Yuan commanders. He adopts an incredibly subservient posture. He thanks them profusely for their glorious military assistance.
He essentially says, "You have done me a great service. Now I must fulfill my end of the bargain. I need to return to my settlement at Majapahit to formally prepare the massive tribute I promised you, which includes the beautiful princesses of the realm. However, the countryside is still chaotic, and I am afraid of bandits. Could you please send an unarmed Yuan escort with me to ensure my safety as I travel back to prepare your wealth?"
The Yuan commanders, blinded by their recent decisive victory, the promise of royal hostages, and the vast wealth they believe they have secured, agree to his request. They detach a contingent of their troops to escort Wijaya back to his territory.
And they tell them not to bring their weapons.
As a gesture of trust and dominance, they explicitly order these escorting troops not to carry their primary weapons.
It is the most fatal mistake of the entire campaign. On May 26th, as soon as Raden Wijaya and the escort are deep within the dense forests of Majapahit territory, the subservient act vanishes. Wijaya's hidden forces surround the unarmed Yuan escort and slaughter every single one of them.
But the slaughter of the escort is merely the opening move of a much larger strategy. Wijaya immediately signals a massive, coordinated guerrilla uprising across the entire region. His forces launch a series of devastating simultaneous ambushes on the main Yuan encampments back near Daha and along the river supply lines.
The Yuan forces are caught entirely off guard. They're resting after a major siege, believing the war is over. Their command structure fragments almost instantly under the surprise attacks.
It's total chaos.
General Shibi, who is commanding a forward detachment, finds himself completely cut off from the main fleet and the rest of the army. He is forced to organize a desperate fighting retreat.
Shibi has to battle his way through over 120 kilometers of highly hostile, unfamiliar territory. The Japanese forces do not engage in another set-piece battle.
Right, they know better than that now.
They utilize their knowledge of the terrain to launch constant hit-and-run attacks, harassing the retreating Yuan column day and night, bleeding them dry.
And it isn't just the Javanese spears and arrows killing the Yuan troops. The environment itself turns into a weapon. The troops are suffering horrific environmental attrition. The intense, humid heat is exhausting the heavily armored infantry.
But more lethally, tropical diseases like malaria and dysentery are running rampant through the exhausted ranks. Men are dropping dead from fever before they even see an enemy soldier.
And looming over this entire chaotic retreat is the inescapable atmospheric clock we discussed at the beginning. The monsoons.
The winds are changing.
The Yuan commanders know that the monsoon winds are about to shift. If they do not reach their ships at Tuban and sail north immediately, they will be trapped on a hostile island for another 6 months. They've burned through their supplies. A delay means starvation. This strict meteorological deadline forces a panicked, disorganized retreat toward the coast.
So what does this all mean? We have to look at the anatomy of this massive defeat. It wasn't a failure of Mongol combat prowess in a traditional battle. They won the sieges. They won the river engagements.
So what broke them?
The defeat was a catastrophic failure of intelligence and an acute vulnerability to asymmetric guerrilla warfare deployed in a hostile equatorial climate. They allowed themselves to be outmaneuvered politically by a local prince who understood that the true strength of his position lay in the terrain and the weather, not just his army.
So they were defeated by the island itself.
The Yuan forces were defeated environmentally as much as they were defeated militarily.
The casualty estimates for this retreat are staggering. Depending on the source, the Yuan expedition lost anywhere from 3,000 elite troops to as much as 60% of their entire force. We're talking about 12,000 to 18,000 men dead from ambushes, drowning in the rivers, or succumbing to tropical diseases.
That is a massive loss.
The battered, traumatized remnants of the massive fleet finally managed to board their ships and depart Java on May 31st. They limp back into the Chinese port of Quanzhou in August, a shattered shadow of the armada that had left.
The political consequences of this retreat ripple outward immediately. Back in China, Kublai Khan is absolutely furious at the humiliating defeat.
Oh, I'm sure he was not happy.
The punitive consequences for the surviving commanders are severe and deeply public. Generals Shibi and Gao Xin are stripped of their ranks. They receive between 17 and 50 lashes with a rod, a brutal physical punishment.
Wow, even after everything they went through.
Furthermore, a third of their personal property and wealth is confiscated by the state to pay for the disastrous expedition.
This failure essentially breaks the back of the Yuan dynasty's maritime ambitions. Kublai Khan dies shortly after, in February 1294. His death officially ends the aggressive, expansionist phase of the Yuan dynasty into Southeast Asia. They never attempt a naval invasion on this scale again. The ocean proved to be a barrier they could not conquer.
Meanwhile, back in Java, the geopolitical landscape has been completely reset. The power vacuum created by the destruction of the Kadiri kingdom allows Raden Wijaya to consolidate absolute control over the island.
He timed it perfectly.
In November 1293, just months after chasing the Mongols into the sea, he is formally crowned as Srikar Katarasa Jayawardhana. He becomes the first king of the Majapahit Empire.
And Majapahit doesn't just survive the aftermath of this chaos. It rapidly thrives. And one of the key reasons they thrive is by absorbing the technological legacy that the Yuan army left behind in their panicked retreat.
When the Yuan forces fled toward the coast, they abandoned massive amounts of equipment, including their gunpowder artillery and the Taipao grenades. The Javanese did not simply discard these weapons, they actively studied them.
They reverse-engineered them.
Yes, they reverse-engineered the metallurgy and the chemistry of the gunpowder. They adapted the continental technology to suit their maritime needs, leading directly to the creation of their own localized gunpowder weapons. The most notable development was the setbang.
The setbang is a breech-loading cannon, primarily cast from bronze. Because it was a breech loader, meaning you load the ammunition into the back of the weapon rather than shoving it down the muzzle, it could be fired much more rapidly.
And the Majapahit mounted these highly effective cannons on their massive jong ships.
This specific technological leap, gifted to them by the fleeing Mongol army, provided Majapahit with the military edge required to expand their maritime dominance across the entire archipelago for the next 2 centuries.
Furthermore, the invasion profoundly altered the cultural memory and the mythos of the Javanese people. The trauma and the ultimate victory over the massive foreign armada were inscribed directly into their architecture and their religious storytelling.
You can see this physically if you look at the Panataran temple complex in East Java, which was constructed during the Majapahit era. The temple features intricate stone reliefs depicting stories from the ancient Hindu epic, the Ramayana. But the artisans incorporated a fascinating, highly specific twist.
In the reliefs, the demonic antagonist of the epic, a character named Indrajit, is explicitly depicted wearing the heavy clothing, the distinct armor, and riding the small step pony characteristic of a Mongol horse archer.
That is such a detail.
The artisans literally carved the faces of their invaders onto the demons of their mythology.
The historical reality of the Yuan invasion was transformed into a mythic, cosmic battle against northern demons. By defeating these literal demons, the Majapahit kings legitimized their rule, presenting themselves as the divine protectors of Java who restored cosmic balance.
This raises an important question regarding historical causality. We have to confront a massive paradox here. What if Kublai Khan had never sent that punitive armada? If the Yuan fleet had never arrived at Tuban, Jakatuang's Kadiri kingdom would likely have remained in power, having successfully crushed the Singasari dynasty.
Exactly. Raden Wijaya would have remained a minor, exiled prince hiding out in the malaria-ridden swamps of the Tarik timberland, eating bitter fruit.
Right.
Without the Mongol invasion inadvertently destroying the usurpers for him, providing Wijaya with the perfect military distraction, and leaving behind advanced gunpowder technology with the Majapahit Empire, the greatest, most dominant maritime power in Indonesian history have ever even formed.
It is highly unlikely. The Yuan expedition acted as the ultimate historical catalyst. They arrived with the explicit intention of subjugating Java, breaking its independence, and incorporating it into a strictly Sinocentric world order.
But they did the exact opposite.
Instead, their violent interference completely dismantled the existing political structures that were keeping Raden Wijaya out of power. They cleared the path for a visionary local leader and provided the technological spark that birthed an empire.
It's the ultimate irony of imperial overreach. Kublai Khan launched the invasion to destroy Javanese independence, but instead he served as the accidental architect for its most powerful, unified, and expansive empire.
He really did.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final concept to mull over. Think back to our opening metaphor. That idea of an unstoppable terrestrial avalanche hitting the murky, unpredictable, and deep waters of the ocean. Consider how modern nations, hundreds of years later, still struggle with the exact same military trap that Kublai Khan fell into in 1293.
It's a recurring theme.
Time and time again, we see massive global superpowers attempting to project highly advanced, overwhelming military power across the globe. The political leaders assume that superior hardware, massive logistical supply chains, and sheer numbers guarantee an inevitable victory,
Right.
only to find themselves entirely unraveled, bogged down in hostile terrain, and ultimately defeated by complex local political machinations, asymmetric guerrilla warfare, and an environment they never truly understood. The arrogance of power often blinds empires to the realities of the ground they are trying to conquer. History, it seems, is perfectly willing to repeat the bitter lessons of the Java Sea if only we are willing to read the map. Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.